an artist. My name's Leonard Kozianski. This is where I work. Welcome to my studio. This is where I work every day. And I'd like to talk to you today about this painting called Stormy Weather that I painted in 2021. It's 42 inches high by 26 inches wide. It's oil on canvas. And it took me about 3 months to paint. And it's a surrealist landscape. It represents the visual appearance of things, as well as my emotional response or recollection of things, blended together to help create perhaps a more truthful image. And it's also a metaphor for what was happening in my own life, which was going through some very stormy weather of its own. So how did this painting begin? Well, it began, as almost all my paintings begin, with a pen and ink drawing in my sketchbook, done with a black Bic ballpoint pen and a whiteout pen. And this idea just sort of came to me. It just sort of like flowed through me. And I didn't need a lot of editing or changes or alterations or other versions. It just sort of happened, sort of like fell off the tip of my pen. And I was very grateful that it came to me that way. And so here, this is how I begin my paintings. Now, this is a different painting. This isn't the Stormy Weather. But I just wanted to use this as an illustration of how I begin a picture with a Vine charcoal drawing. And I like Vine charcoal because it allows me to make changes very easily, very quickly. Then I go over it with ink, and I use a water-based ink because that allows me to then wipe turpentine-based pigments over the top of it without dissolving the ink lines, because I like to begin my paintings by toning the canvas. And so here, let me explain to you a little bit about why I like to tone a canvas. Now that my canvas is toned, I'm going to let it dry, and then I'm going to begin painting. And since most of the colors I'm going to apply are blues and greens because it's a landscape, the reddish brown is the opposite. It's the complement of blue and green. So a little bit of that reddish brown is going to flicker through those blue-green brushstrokes, animating them. Plus, the reddish brown tone will modulate the blues and greens depending on how thickly I apply them. Now, a lot of people paint on a white canvas. I don't care for that because on a white canvas all the colors are darker, so it's a process of darkening. Plus the white tends to rob some of the colors of their intensity. I prefer this more chiaroscuro technique where some of the colors are darker and some of the colors are lighter, so I'm working light to dark right away. And so that's why I like to tone a canvas, and that's how I like to begin a painting. And so here is the painting Stormy Weather, about 3/4 of the way through. The clouds are fairly complete. The houses are indicated, but I'm not really sure about the figures, how many I want or where they should be. But here's the painting when it's finished, Stormy Weather. And it's, a stormy weather rolling over this landscape, a figure running for shelter, birds flying across the sky. We can see the moon up in the corner there. And there's a contrast between sort of the vertical of the clouds and the horizontal of the clouds, and so they create sort of dramatic contrast, and that is all contrasted with the houses and the roads, which are very geometric. So the clouds are very organic in their forms, and the civilization, the ground, is very geometric in its forms. And so that creates a nice compositional contrast. And the edges of the shadows are different between the ones that are cast by the houses, which are very sharp, and the ones cast by the clouds, which are much softer. Because, those clouds, they're sort of like semi-transparent, so their edges are soft. Also, the greater the distance from an object and its shadow, the softer that becomes, even with sunlight. So, and we sort of like a warm sunlight, warm sunny areas, and cooler shadowy areas. And then here in the distance, we can see that grid of the roads getting, the size of the grid gets smaller as it goes back, and it gets dimmer. The road gets thinner. In the town where I grew up, in the suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, it was impossible to get lost because all the streets were laid out on a grid. And so this is my symbolic representation of that. This doesn't represent any specific place. It's a symbolic representation of the way those roads are laid out in grid fashion in the Midwest. And we can see a car going across the road or driving down the road with its lights on, because when those storms roll in, we turn our lights on because it gets very dark. The storms are very dramatic. They're beautiful in their own way, but they're also very destructive and threatening. So it's a crazy contrast between their organic beauty and their threatening nature. And here are those clouds. They're those sort of cumulus storm clouds rolling in. And I'm using the colors of the clouds to help create a sense of space. The clouds up close are rendered with warmer colors, more, sort of tan, ochre colors. And then as they go back in space, they get bluer and bluer. First they go gray, and then they become fairly blue and blue-green off in the distance. And that helps to create a sense of space with the clouds. And notice that the primary lines of the clouds here are vertical. And then, I'm also influenced by the clouds of other artists. So here's a painting by Jacob van Ruysdael. He's a Dutch landscape artist, and this was done in 1670. But I love his clouds, and when I was an art student, I copied one of his paintings because I loved his clouds so much. But here, this is a Dutch landscape artist, and it's a very realistic painting of the Dutch landscape. But back in my painting, at the top of the picture, I have those sort of like those stringy horizontal clouds that we see scurrying across the sky in a storm. And I'm using the colors here to help create a sense of space as well. Notice that the color is a little browner, a little warmer up close, and then as the clouds get farther back, they get grayer, they get smaller and grayer, and that helps to create a sense of space in this picture. Here are the clouds that are up close. These are the foreground clouds, and again, they're also very horizontal, and they contrast with the vertical of the storm clouds, and they provide a transition from those billowy storm clouds to the landscape. In fact, we look between those fingers of the clouds to see the landscape underneath. The shape of those clouds, the edges of those clouds was a real challenge. And the color of the clouds along their edges, that was a challenge too, because in order to give a sense of sort of transparency to the clouds, I had to have some of that color behind them showing through. And here are the birds flying across the middle of the painting. I didn't want the birds to be too detailed because I wanted them to be somewhat distant. So I represented them more in silhouette form. And then the ones that are up close are a little bit bigger. The ones that are farther away, a little bit smaller. But they, when a storm comes in, we see those birds flying across the sky as they go scurrying for shelter. And so here's the finished painting, Stormy Weather, a surrealist landscape that represents that interaction between nature and civilization, but also is a metaphor for what was happening in my own life, which was going through some very stormy weather itself. And so when the painting was finished, I had to let it dry and then varnish it and frame it. And then I sent it to one of my favorite galleries, the J. Willott Gallery out in California, and they hung it on their wall and sold it to a very prominent collector or pair of collectors who have a very prominent collection in their home. And there's my painting over there on the left. And this photograph was taken from an art magazine, American Art Collector, a prominent art magazine. And these collectors, their collection is prominent enough to be featured in this magazine. And so I was absolutely delighted to have my painting in such a good collection and then to have it appear in a prominent art magazine. Well, thank you for watching this video. And if you wouldn't mind, please subscribe and leave a comment, or, my children, they check my numbers, and and please help me get them off my back. Press that little bell button wherever that is so that you're notified when I post a new video. But by subscribing and leaving comments, you help keep my kids off my back. But thank you for watching this video.